you go on to ask, you beg the question, where would an ought come from if you were an atheist? You know, where does the ought come from, right? If you believe that there are moral oughts, where would it come from if you're an atheist? Okay. All right. You make another claim. A case of what merely is cannot lead to what ought to be the case. So what you said before is that atheism is self-contradictory because it has a rational ought, but it doesn't have a moral ought. And then you go on to say that the rational ought does not lead to a moral ought. Or, in other words, empiricism does not lead. Empiricism, which is what an atheist would call a rational ought, does not lead to a moral ought. That's your claim. And you kind of say, you kind of ask, like, clearly, you know, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how a rational ought can lead to a moral ought. I don't know how a rational ought flows into a moral ought. So essentially that's a proof by your own ignorance. You don't know how, therefore it's not possible. That's your little proof there. But you go on and you kind of give another proof for it, or it kind of leads into another claim, an implied claim, but it's kind of derived maybe from this previous claim. You say ises are different from oughts. Okay, now we are starting to see that there is something called an is, and this is something that wasn't really defined before, but I kind of went ahead and defined it for you as empiricism for atheists. It would be, this is what I observe. It merely is the case that, all right, I observe that the sky is blue. That's what it is to an atheist. And it's not clearly defined what an is. All right, but I think we're going with the rational ought for is. We'll go ahead and say that is essentially means the atheistic rational ought, which is empiricism. This is the way it should be, the normative fact for atheism. Are different, so the rational ought is entirely different from the ought, which I think you are saying moral ought, to go along with the previous thing. Essentially this is saying the rational ought is completely different from the moral ought, right? I'm trying to go with your previous claim that there are two branches, ethics and rationality, moral and reasonability. The rational ought is completely different from the moral ought. I'm trying to make sense of your argument here. The is not clearly defined, so forgive me. If there are oughts, then the universe has to start with an ought for any of this to make sense. Okay, what I'm getting here is if there are moral oughts, then the universe has to start with a moral ought for any of this to make sense. There is intentionality, and a good candidate for this is God. So you're saying that this is the implication here is that all moral oughts come from a primary moral ought. So there's also another inherent assumption here that moral oughts lead to more moral oughts, that there is a flow of moral oughts. And you go on to say that the primary moral ought, a good candidate for this primary moral ought is God. Okay, so lots of claims here. All right, first in this one little thing. First, you're saying that there is a primary moral ought. That's your first claim. The second claim is that moral oughts lead to more moral oughts. Okay, that's the second claim. And the third one is that a good candidate for this primary moral ought is God. All right, 3 claims. So far, we've got definitions and we've got claims. And a proof by example and a proof by your own ignorance. That doesn't make any sense. Really, that's not a proof of ignorance. But yeah. I mean, it's not a proof by example. But we'll get into that when I analyze this. This is starting to turn into a really long video already. All right. Then you make the claim, if you have merely is, it cannot produce an ought because oughts are different from ises. All right. Reworded, all right, because is not properly defined like the ought was. You said normative fact is what ought to be the case, and ought became a simplified version of normative fact. Is not clearly defined, but I assume what you mean by merely is the rational ought. Okay, so I'm going to reword it. If you say, if you have rational ought, I'm going to reword it again. If you have atheistic rational ought, it cannot produce a moral ought because the atheistic rational ought is totally different from the moral ought. All right, that's your claim and somewhat of a proof. So you're saying that this is I'm just going to go ahead and just clearly refute this. You're saying that object A cannot produce object B because A and B are different. That is your argument. Because they are different, one does not lead to the other. Does that make any sense to you at all? No, and it doesn't make any sense to me at all, okay? That is illogical. That's a logical fallacy. How does that make any sense? No, it doesn't make sense. All right? No. Bad proof, but we'll throw you a bone there. So I'm trying to throw you as many bones as possible. Next, you make a claim. Better, and I'm going to go ahead and say the concept of quality, which I'm just going to call that because I'm going to call it that because with quality you can say this is better, this is worse. That's essentially what quality is: better quality, lesser quality. All right, better, worse. The concept of quality for atheists is measured by statistics. You say the words statistically more successful, and this carries no normative oughtness. All right. All right. So, trying to make sense of this. You're saying that atheists. All right. Yeah. Going back to what you had before, the continuum of reasonability with the 1 and the 0. This state of mind is more reasonable than this state of mind, etc. Atheists measure this continuum of reasonability through statistics. Is it statistically more successful? That's how you determine which one is more reasonable and which one is less reasonable. All right. Okay. And I'm assuming that you're limiting this only to the argument for God. You're limiting only this only to the argument of God, since clearly there are atheists out there who measure quality in art without statistics. They measure cooking without statistics. They measure dancing without statistics. Quality, this is a better dancer than this. It's kind of really beyond reason. It's all about beauty, sort of. I mean, you could combine reasonability, but that's a totally different argument. I'm assuming that you are limiting this only to the argument for God. And to reword this into the vocabulary that we've been building in this argument so far,